Mr. Chancellor, Mr. President, honored guests, faculty, students, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Deborah McCallum, Vice President Administration of the University of Manitoba, and I am honored to be reading this citation today. The highest honor the Senate of the University can confer upon an individual is an honorary doctorate. At the University of Manitoba, the criteria include distinguished achievement in scholarship, the arts, or public service. Our honorary graduate this morning is Mr. Lloyd Robertson. Admired as one of the most trusted journalists in Canada, Lloyd Robertson is recognized for his dedication to informing and educating Canadian citizens through comprehensive and objective reporting. With 35 years at the helm of the CTV National News, Mr. Robertson became the longest-serving national news anchor in TV history, beating Dan Rather and Walter Cronkite, to name but two colleagues. With unrivaled integrity, character, and equanimity, Mr. Robertson has shaped the way generations of Canadians understood their country and its place in the world. For over 60 years, he reported to Canadians on events that mattered to them. He covered the election of nearly half of Canada's prime ministers and the death of 4 of them. He was there when the Berlin Wall rose, and he reported back to us when it fell. He covered the moon landing and the Gulf War. He informed us during royal weddings, visits, deaths, and a Jubilee. He covered 2 Quebec referenda, Terry Fox's Marathon of Hope, and 9 Olympic Games. Unflappable, Mr. Robertson was always there to tell us, in his signature sign-off, what kind of day it had been. His career began in 1952 in Stratford, Ontario, where he was an announcer and operator at CJCS Radio. Then he worked in radio in Guelph, Ontario, before taking a job at the CBC in Winnipeg in 1956. Mr. Robertson read the CBC Weekend News from 1962 until 1970, when he became the anchor for CBC's The National. In 1976, he left CBC to become a co-anchor for CTV's national news program. In 1983, he became CTV's chief news anchor and senior news editor. Mr. Robertson retired in 2011, a few years after being inducted into the Canadian Association of Broadcasters Hall of Fame. Mr. Robertson is an Officer of the Order of Canada and the recipient of 2 Gemini Awards. He won the Canadian Association of Broadcasters Golden Ribbon Award for Broadcast Excellence in 1995-96, and he was voted Most Trusted TV Journalist 10 times by TV Guide magazine. He's the first journalist inducted into Canada's Walk of Fame, and September 1st has been declared Lloyd Robertson Day in his hometown of Stratford, Ontario. Mr. Robertson's commitment to Canada extends beyond the newsroom. He's co-anchored the annual Hospital for Sick Children Foundation's telethon in Toronto for over a decade, and he served as the honorary chair for the Terry Fox Run. Even in the earliest days of his career, Mr. Robertson invested in community causes. A 1955 clipping from the Winnipeg Free Press notes that Mr. Robertson was lending his celebrity to a fundraising event at Winnipeg's Rockwood School. In 2006, he was given an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from Royal Roads University in Victoria, British Columbia. And today, he receives a Doctor of Laws degree from the University of Manitoba, a school that celebrates Mr. Robertson's trend-setting spirit and his role in Canadian society as an adamant defender of truth. Mr. Chancellor, it is an honor for me to ask on behalf of the Senate of the University of Manitoba that you confer upon Mr. Lloyd Robertson the degree of Doctor of Laws honoris causa.
By virtue of the authority vested in me as Chancellor of this university, I admit you to the degree of Doctor of Laws honoris causa, with all the rights and privileges thereto appertaining. Congratulations, Dr. Robertson.
Mr. Chancellor, Mr. President, honored guests, members of the faculty, students, ladies and gentlemen, it's great to be back in Winnipeg. I have to tell you that receiving an honorary degree from this university has deep meaning for me. You can have no idea how well-timed and how appropriate it is. As I move into this are where I received the equivalent of my graduate education, after all. My wife Nancy, who's here with me today, she and I have a special bond for this part of the world. This is where we settled after being married and where our first child was born. We were struck by the openness and friendliness of the people, the wide range of activities available here, from symphony concerts to little theater and ballet to curling, and yes, of course, we curled. And I got around a lot doing broadcasts throughout the province. Portage-la Prairie, Flin Flon, The Paw, Dauphin, Thompson, Churchill. I arrived first on my own in January of 1956 and stepped out at the railway station here on Main Street in a light topcoat I'd worn when I was working for CBC Radio in Windsor, Ontario. Now, Windsor, as you may or may not know, can have a pretty temperate climate in the wintertime. It can get very cold and damp at times, but it can be mostly temperate. Well, I stepped out in that topcoat here and was aware right away of the dry cold of prairie legend. And the cab driver who was there to take me to the TV station laughed and said, "Ha, you're brand new here, aren't you? You better learn to dress for winter, kid." So I agreed that we should go straight to the Hudson's Bay store down Portage Avenue, where I picked up the designer winter clothing of choice, one of those big, beautiful parkas. I had come here with the intention of learning something about this new medium called television. Yes, believe it or not, television was new at one time. And it was sprouting all across the land in the 50s, beginning in 52 in Ontario in the east. And Canadian television came on the air rather quickly to counter the signals coming over the border from the US, because it was felt that we had to have our own statement of Canadian culture and entertainment through our own television service, as had happened with radio many years before. Who knew that television would become such a dominant force in our lives, and what's long been called a television generation would emerge? We would then oversee the explosion of the information age that would morph into today's interconnected world with YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Wikipedia. How many of you have your little gadgets with you here this morning? Quite a few, eh? Yeah. Nobody's looking down and tweeting, "This guy is boring already." Nobody's doing that yet? I hope not. My early education in television was not much like your own endeavors, because there were no schools available. We had to learn by doing right here at the CBC on Portage Avenue, with easy access to a tiny Salisbury house next door. And that's where this Eastern kid still wet behind the ears, learned about the delights of nips. Meant something quite different from my experience elsewhere in the country, but I was also introduced to that steamy beef stew. Ooh, what comfort food. Running next door in 20 below weather became a wintertime tradition for all of us as we were learning the ropes the hard way back in the building next door. Canadian television in Manitoba had been on the air about a year and had developed its own sets of rules and codes, language, practices, and we all had to become familiar with them quickly. We learned quite early that it was an unforgiving medium, brutally harsh, for those who didn't look right for the unrelenting gaze of the camera, or who had unfortunate tics or habits that would cause the viewer to be distracted. And then there were the distractions for those of us inside the studios with the searing intensity of the blindingly bright television lights required in the early days of TV. And there were those members of the crew who, after spending long hours setting up the broadcast, would go off into a doze. And one who broke into when I was doing my spiel, doing a newscast, broke into a snore. Well, if you managed to cope with all of this, you also had to deal with the runny tan-colored makeup plastered on like a trowel, as we used to say. You had to use that, or the person looking into the camera would look ghostly pale under the hot glare of bright lights in black and white television. And even the men had to wear makeup and lipstick, and it brought hoots from the makeup artists to see the guys furiously scrubbing off the lipstick before they ventured out into the street. Yes, breaking into TV was a very Darwinian process. There was a thorough weeding out. And one of my duties during my time in Winnipeg was to host a program called Spotlight. Now, I imagine there might be some people here in this audience, up there or there, not out here, who remember the Spotlight. Remember Ed Russenholt, the writer and veteran of 2 world wars who did the weather, always describing Manitoba as the heart of the continent. And Jack Wells, Cactus Jack as we knew him, Jack was Winnipeg personified. And I mention him and point to him because he really was, to so many of us, what Winnipeg represented. He was happy, he was friendly, he was delighted to take newcomers under his wing and make us all feel welcome. Jack never took himself seriously and was happy to tell stories on himself and have others tell them about him. One that made the rounds was Jack's play-by-play of 2 opposing players who got into an altercation at a Winnipeg Blue Bombers football game, and he talked about them throwing epitaphs at each other, epitaphs. And when later corrected and told, "No, Jack, the word is epithets," Jack's reaction was, "What the hell? If I said they were epitaphs, that's what they were, epitaphs." Even in black and white TV, he was always colorful. We all worked hard in that intense learning experience of early TV, and we played hard too, just the way you've done over the last few years. And as you probably know, in today's interconnected and highly competitive world, you keep on working, enthusiastically meeting your challenges head on, and you keep on learning. That's what we did. But be sure to save time for your spiritual and emotional growth as well. Life, after all, has to be lived on several different levels. If there's anything to be learned from my experience, it is to follow your passion if you can. When I was close to 12 years old, I remember being on what I would call my first news special site, the march home of the men in the Perth Regiment, 1946 in Stratford, Ontario, where my friends and I found a great location holding up by the side of the supports for the local radio station CJCS. And the commentators up above began describing the scene. And when those bands broke in to play and the commentators began to describe the scene, I was inside myself at the time, and I came out of myself and realized that this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be at the center of things. And I was right there at the center of things, and I felt that same enthusiasm on every big broadcast all through my career. Now, I know that many of you will say, well, that's fine, he followed his passion, but what if my passion is being a concert pianist and I have trouble with Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star? Well, advice is don't go there, but do it in your spare time. But find what you really want to do and do it. Because the worst thing that can happen to you is to say when you're 55 years old, oh gosh, I wish I'd done such and such. How many times have you heard that from mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles? What I learned in Winnipeg over 4.5 years gave me the grounding I needed to move forward. Like so many others at that time, I came west because that's how the traffic flowed in those days, and then went back east. Yes, Winnipeg certainly was large and prominent and well-respected enough in professional circles that you could have a successful and satisfying career here if you chose to stay. However, if you wanted to move to the perceived top of the ladder, you had to aim for Toronto as the English center in broadcasting, Montreal for the French. Now, we're all sensing the seismic shifts coming in the media universe as well as everywhere else. We have seen transformational change in this country over the last few years, and it's not lost on anybody that the West is where it's at. The spirit, the energy, the sheer life force that is sweeping over the rest of the country from Western Canada is unprecedented. It's long been forecast as something that was going to happen, and now it's here. The old mantra first enunciated by former Reform Party leader Preston Manning, that the West wants in, when he was lecturing Ottawa, is now outdated. The West isn't just in, it is dominant. Take Manitoba, a great place to live. The Jets are back, and their arrival certainly sent a signal to the rest of the country. It was a tangible symbol that Winnipeg and Manitoba are alive and well. The great revitalization was underway. There is the spanking new airport, one of the best in the world from what I've been able to see, the new educational infrastructure, and the wealth of hydroelectric power, the Canadian Health Centre for Human and Animal Health, and still to come, the Canadian Museum of Human Rights. Now, you may gather that I'm pretty enthusiastic about this place. You would be right. Oh, sure, there is the winter, but it's a dry cold. We all know that. We all understand that you will go where your career takes you, but the old refrain about "Go west, young man, go west" is back again with revised lyrics. Stay west, young men and women. It is the place to be. Now, I know it's natural for your commencement speaker to want to send you out on a high note, but I'd like to bring a little balance today to this occasion, a little touch of reality. I want to share a few thoughts with you from writer Charles Wheeler, whose book, just released this month, deals with 10 things your commencement speaker won't tell you. He contends too many commencement speakers simply give you what you want to hear and not what you need to hear. So I have chosen some ideas from him and have mixed them with my own thoughts to give you an even half dozen of do's and don'ts. 1, treasure your friendships. Going to school is about learning, yes, but one of the important casual factors associated with happiness and well-being is your meaningful connections with other human beings. Look around today. Certainly, one hallmark of your graduation success should be how many of these people will still be your close friends in 10 or 20 years from now. Number 2, life is not fair. Get used to it. All of us who get very far have setbacks and detours along the way. Try not to be a whiner when it happens to you. Accept it and deal with it. And deal with it in the way you've been taught to deal with it by your professors here. All of these wonderful faces out in front of me smiling now because I know that you're accepting the fact that it's going to be difficult when you get out there. But don't worry, you have the stuff to do it. You're trained. You're ready. Don't make the world worse is number 3. You are smart and motivated and creative. Everyone will say, you can change the world. They are right, but remember, changing the world can also include things like skirting financial regulations and causing grievous harm to millions of people. Take the Wall Street company that was betting against the success of financial securities it was selling to its own clients. Now, my friend Dr. John McCallum down here would say that there's no morality, when it comes to Wall Street and financial things, but they have been selling, people insurance on going to heaven for many years now, and it's never happened. So understand that there are certain areas that you get into where you're going to find yourself challenged, perhaps in that respect, and draw upon the experience and your learning here to carry you through that. Get control of your expectations is number 4. Don't expect to be made a vice president with a car phone, earning $80,000 a year the moment you leave university. I constantly hear company executives complaining about the expectations of entitlement among today's students, unless you're one of the rare ones who instantly shoots to the top. And if I'm any example, it's going to take a while. Famous people are always giving you quotes about money, but I like the Beatles lyrics best. See if I'm in key now. For I don't care too much for money, 'cause money can't buy me love. Oh, well, thank you. Money may be great, but time is really more important. And when your time's up, it's up. And it's all borrowed time. Number 5, it's all borrowed time. You shouldn't take anything for granted, not even tomorrow. Charles Wheeler talks about the hit by a bus rule. Would I regret spending my life this way if I were to get hit by a bus next week or next year? And does this path lead to a life I'll be happy with if I don't get hit by a bus? Number 6, don't try to be great. Being great involves luck and other circumstances beyond your control. The less you think about being great, the more likely it is to happen. And if it doesn't, there is absolutely nothing wrong with being solid. You can still make a difference in the way you do things. So appreciate every day on your life's journey. Go with your passion, go with your bliss. In reference to what your president said, don't be bound all the time by conventional wisdom. Follow your bliss, have a good time, and have a good trip, everybody. Thank you.